Limbus Company is a gacha game that receives constant support. Every couple of weeks we get new content, with identities and egos of today often one-upping their older counterparts, which results in power creep. Identities fall to the waves of power creep every season, but egos are typically more resilient. Ego skills are tools meant to do a certain niche thing, and you won't find a lot of examples of tool skills filling the same role. Yet, even among egos, there are many lacking skills that aren't particularly worth investing into nowadays. Most of these egos come from the early days of Limbus Company, back when Project Moon were figuring stuff out, and as such, they can often be weak numerically or literally just weirdly designed. However, in Season 7, Threadspin 5 was added into the game, breathing new life into these tools from the old world, in hopes of bringing them back into the spotlight all these years later. In today's video, I want to look at each of the 5 Threadspin 5s in the game, and talk about what I like about the changes, what I don't like, what I want to see in the future from this mechanic, and of course whether the existing Threadspins are worth investing into. But before we start, allow me to remind you that most of my viewers are not subscribed, so if you find yourself coming back to my videos or end up enjoying this one, consider subscribing. It takes just 1 second and helps me out a lot. Now let's get to the egos. We'll look at all of the Threadspin 5s in chronological order, starting with 4th Match Flame Ryoshu. At Threadspin 4, this ego was already pretty decent. The skill itself has some decent damage that scales with burn, and hits 3 enemies at once, providing a bit of wrath AoE. It's not a skill you would relentlessly reuse for its effects, but it's definitely not a waste of a turn. However, a larger part of this ego's value lies in its passive, aptly named 4th Match Flame. This passive adds 4 final power and 4 burn potency on hit to every 4th skill that Ryoshu uses. Ordinarily, this effect is strong, but it doesn't come online very often, only once every 4 turns. However, more recent Ryoshu identities have been spamming assist attacks, with the Blade of the House of Spiders Ryoshu not only getting a bonus attack every turn, but also getting access to bonus skills, which makes her the perfect user of this passive, as she can proc it every turn. This makes the passive of the ego its biggest source of power, and Project Moon know that, because Threadspin 5 for this ego mainly buffed up the passive. The skill itself got a bonus wrath damage effect, scaling with burn, which makes it a bit more potent on field, while the passive got a lot of changes. In addition to giving the skill power, the passive now also makes the skill deal up to 20% more damage, scaling with burn, if the skill has the wrath affinity, further helping House of Spiders Ryoshu and defining this ego as mainly a burn/wrath buffing skill. Additionally, the passive now uniquely affects other ego skills, where if the skill is positive, Ryoshu gets 10 SP before flipping its coins for damage, and if the skill is negative, Ryoshu loses 15 SP instead. This allows 4th Match Flame to increase the damage consistency of other ego skills, and as of right now, that mainly applies to one important ego, Great Trichiliacosm Ryoshu. This skill is a 3-coin AoE nuke that costs 10 SP in Awakening. With only 35 SP to flip coins normally, the ego often misses some of its rolls, which greatly decreases its damage, especially if the last coin hits tails. The 4th Match Flame passive, however, makes it so that a well-timed Great Trick will flip coins at 45 SP, so you only have a 5% chance to miss, increasing the consistency greatly. On top of that, the ego is Wrath, so it gets that 20% damage bonus, making it an even greater pairing. Great Trick mainly acts as a signature nuke of Blade Ryoshu, as she has access to the unique effect that the ego scales with, and 4th Match Flame joins it as another tool of the one-woman army. 4th Match Flame Ryoshu Threadspin 5 is a generally pretty strong buff for the strongest ID in the game, and I would say that it is worth getting if you value strength in longer encounters, where Ryoshu shines. Next up, 4th Match Flame Yisung. This ego is the second to receive a Threadspin 5, and Lord knows it fucking needed it. 4th Match Flame Yisung at Threadspin 4 did a couple things. It hit 5 targets, inflicted up to 10 burn, and got bonus burn infliction on its passive. However, none of these things were done particularly well. While the ego does have 5 target AoE, it also has a max roll of 20 and no damage modifiers, meaning this could never be an AoE nuke. On the infliction side, 6 of the burn potency is locked behind the head's hit, which isn't terribly hard to get, but the ego does cost 20 SP, meaning you're looking at a max of 75% to get the full value. And the passive is a train wreck, requiring a clash win under Absolute Wrath Resonance for some measly 2 to 3 burn infliction. All of that is neatly tied up by the frankly ludicrous cost of 5 Wrath, 1 Sloth and 1 Gluttony, and you've got yourself an ego that doesn't do anything right. Threadspin 5 had a lot of things to do here, and it kinda didn't do much. I mean, the ego got some power, rolling up to 30 now, and it also got a damage conditional of up to 30% scaling with burn, but that still does not make it an AoE nuke in any sense, as we just went from 1 damage to 3 damage in a world of 100 damage real nukes. But it's alright, there are more things to fix, and this is just a facelift in the stats department. The infliction went unchanged. It's still 4+6, so the ego did not gain a burst burn infliction niche or anything. As for its passive, this part actually saw good improvement, with 1 clash power, which is nothing, but also a much higher amount of burn being inflicted on clash win, and only requiring normal resonance instead of absolute. Also, the skill got a new unique effect called blazing in its corrosion, and that gives 2 final power to 1 skill at the cost of HP. Even on Furioso, this effect is about a 20 damage increase, and we're talking about the strongest skill in the game here. Overall, this Threadspin 5 gives the ego a bit of power, but that power is spread between many malfunctioning parts of the skill, and does not end up giving it a really good niche that you would want to use it for. Also, I'm not sure why Project Moon didn't reduce the cost of this ego, as they did that with a different Threadspin 5, and that change could make Yisung's 4th Match Flame a bit easier to use. It doesn't help that Rien Yisung, the identity you will see used alongside Blade Ryoshu in the modern burn composition, hates using egos in general, so this was kind of a lost cause. I'd say that investing in 4th Match Flame Yisung is not worth it at all. Next up, 4th Match Flame Rodion. This is an incredibly powerful setup ego for Wrath physical damage. Starting at Threadspin 3, Rodion's 4MF inflicts 3 Wrath fragility on the enemy next turn, providing a fat 30% damage amp to any Wrath nuke against a boss. The skill can also roll up to 38, although rarely, inflicts 6 burn and gives Rodion a way to heal up on kill, which is not too useful too often. The ego's greatest strength is obviously the fragility it inflicts, and an amp to 4th Match Flame Rodion would need to play more into that to make it an even better tool. And Project Moon understood the assignment with this one. Threadspin 5 for Rodion's ego improves it in a couple ways. The negative coin loses 5 power, meaning the lowest number the skill can roll now is 25. Additionally, the skill gets an unbreakable coin and a damage conditional. This isn't the important stuff, however. At attack end, the ego gives Rodion 1 Wrath power and damage up, which allows her to self-setup a lot better using this ego. This mainly applies to Thumb Rodion, of course, as that identity is actually designed in a way where the usage of this ego before a disposal is very easy to accomplish and quite valuable. The other big buff the ego received is in its passive. At combat start, if Wrath Absolute Resonance is present, Rodion gets the ability to inflict Wrath Fragility on Clash Win, once per turn. This effect allows Rodion to continue giving her allies damage amps passively, but this part is reliant on speed, and Thumb Rodion, unfortunately, only gets 1 speed from her Shin, whereas most others get 2, so she isn't consistently outspeeding someone like Blade Ryoshu, who would love to get that buff. This effect can also be stacked on top of the Ego's initial use, allowing 4th Match Flame Rodion to amp the damage of her entire team by 40% instead of 30%. And for Rodion herself, this effect cannot miss, meaning that Disposal enjoys a nice 1 final power and 50% damage modifiers whenever you hit a 4th Match Flame before it. Overall, the buff from Threadspin 5 is a nice addition to the House of Spiders Scorch team, and can find a lot of value in longer content. That being said, 4th Match Flame Rodion was already a good ego before it, so it's not like the buff is breathing new life into it. Also, an important note is that about 80% of this ego's main value is accessible at Threadspin 3, not even 4, so to get to these buffs, you need to invest a lot of resources. If you're a newer player, I'd say hold off on this until you have every other piece of strong content for the team. But once you have all of that, definitely Threadspin Rodion's ego, as it is a worthwhile investment. This is the end of the 4th Match Flame lineup, and now we're moving on to Lifetime Stew, which I think is a bit more hype. I won't make you wait. We're starting with Sinclair, the meme ego. Before the Threadspin 5 update, Lifetime Stew Sinclair was a strong contender for literal worst ego skill in the entirety of Limbus company. This skill is a 7-weight ego with indiscriminate targeting, and it aims for the lowest HP units, dealing 0 damage if the target is an ally. On head's hit, it heals the allies it hits, and on tail's hit, it inflicts 7 burn and gives allies ego resource amp and haste. The passive of the ego allows Sinclair to inflict burn on tail's hit. It's a pretty simple ego overall, with the ally targeting being its main unique feature, and it does incredibly little. The healing is there, and healing itself holds no offensive value, but in this case it's not even that good at covering chip damage, because it's a whopping 10% of max HP, which is, again, very little. The resource amp is much more interesting, but there are a lot of issues with it. A 6-cost ego giving amp to 6 allies means you break even at base, and can get extra resources only if you have assist attacks. The self-burn isn't a big deal, but it can lead to staggers, which absolutely sucks. And the kicker is that you need to hit tails to get it, which is a tall order for basically anyone other than N-Corp Sinclair, who hasn't been relevant in years. If I were to pick out one interesting thing from the entirety of the Threadspin 4 version of the skill, it would be access to ego resource amp. And luckily, Threadspin 5 improves your access to that effect drastically. But let's look at all of the changes. The ego got 6 more power and an unbreakable coin, and its gluttony cost dropped to 0. At attack end, Sinclair heals SP by the amount of allies he hits, and also heals HP scaling with allies hit as well. On top of that, Sinclair himself gets 1 ego resource amp and 2 haste. The coin's effects are no longer split, and now it both heals allies for up to 20% and gives resource amp and haste, with a tails hit inflicting burn on top of that. Additionally, the passive now makes Sinclair gain or lose SP with burn skills, and that converts into bonus damage at certain SP thresholds. Overall, the ego got a lot of love. The healing shot up, the bonus damage on passive is nice, and the SP healing seems to be aimed at Don Sinclair, although he doesn't really need it thanks to Don Gregor. The biggest improvement though is obviously the resource stuff. Self-infliction of ego resource amp and the lowered cost combine to make this ego +2 in resources at base, and that increases when assist attacks are involved. And they are involved en masse when we talk about the House of Spiders Scorch team, where Don Sinclair could make use of this ego to give you a large resource boost. generating a lot of extra resources, going up to a net positive of 10 in some admittedly specific scenarios. The ego is definitely no longer a contender for worst of all time, but I also wouldn't rush to call lifetime Stew Sinclair super powerful. Yes, the ego can give resources, but that's a pretty niche and high-level gimmick, so while it can be useful now, it probably won't be all that big too often. That is to say that lifetime Stew Sinclair is a potentially worthwhile investment. I'd grab the Ryoshu and Rodion TS5s before gunning for the soup, but I think it's overall an interesting tool that might pop up in some notable clears eventually. You can also look at it as just a healing ego, but to be fair, you don't usually need completely team-wide healing, and a lot of archetypes have team-specific healing egos that also do something offensively helpful in the meantime. And finally, lifetime Stew Dawn. This ego, much like Sinclair's soup, didn't see much use despite being very old. All this ego does at Threadspin 4 is hit 3 enemies for some meek damage, which scales with last resources, while also inflicting 3 burn count. The passive of the skill converts 2 random resources into 1 last resource every turn, and I gotta say, this has to be one of the weirdest passives ever. Not only does it literally just lose you resources, but it also converts other resources into last, when the ego itself costs 5 lust to use, meaning you use it in a team with a lot of lust. Genuinely, what is the point? Well, anyways, the Threadspin 5. This gives the ego some conditional power, turbocharges its damage modifier, and also adds bleed count on top of its burn count. Also, the ego grants last power up to allies in deployment order based on last resources owned. The passive of the skill now converts resources 1 to 1, gives Dawn 1 last power up at 20 last resources, and makes Dawn deal up to 10% more damage with last base skills based on resources. The corrosion also gets a fat damage modifier by consuming last resources. That's about it for the changes, and I wouldn't say that the ego really becomes super strong with them, although I see the vision. Overall, lifetime Stew Dawn switches from pretending to be a burn ego to being a bleed ego. The 3 count is more valuable on bleed, and last is that team's signature sin, so having last resource requirements makes more sense there. Still, the ego retains some issues. The conversion might not lose you resources straight up anymore, but again, getting rid of pride or envy, both of which are valuable for sanguine desire, to get more lust, which you print effectively infinitely, is pretty bad. The resource requirements for power are also pretty insane, with 30 needed for the maxed out team buff and 20 for some power on Dawn. And the corrosion needs 16 lust to get to its max potential, so let's not talk about that one. This skill seems to be made as a tool for Manager Dawn on Bleed, who can use the extra power and damage to amp her skill 3 too, and can use the skill itself in places where she would want to go for her counter, as it still contributes to resonance, but deals more damage, inflicts more count, and the first use activates the passive. Do I think it's a potent reusable tool for Manager? No. But at least it will make people shut up about wishing Cairn in Bleed, and that's already an IRL feat. No, but for real though, lifetime Stew Dawn is not an ego I'd invest in, at least not now, especially since Bleed is currently in a pretty sad state, since all of the new content is long fights, and Bleed currently lacks the strength to keep up in those. Overall, this is my rating on whether Threadspin 5 upgrades are worth it for the 5 egos that currently have them. As for my thoughts on the mechanic, I think that the rich keep getting richer with this one, while the actually bad egos are pretty hit or miss. Sinclair's soup got a really good buff, but Dawn and Yi-Sang were bad and ended up staying bad, while Rodion and Ryoshu were good and got even better. That being said, PM's willingness to change costs and add keywords with these updates is super promising for the future of Threadspin 5. If you disagree or have something to add, feel free to leave a comment below, and I might read it and respond. If you liked the video at any point, leave a like to let me know, and if you want to see more like this, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!